Dr. Singh, for inviting me to speak with you today. My presentation is predicated on the assumption that most of you in the audience will be familiar with S&OP and IBP. However, for those of you who aren't familiar with the concepts, then I believe the content that I'll be presenting today will still be useful in your efforts to strengthen your planning processes. The motivation for my topic is quite straightforward and similar to what Dr. Singh was talking about, is in the current environment, we're hearing all sorts of stories and approaches to managing the daily perceived changes and impact on business. And I believe there are some key facts and approaches that could help you and your companies hold their course and still manage the changes that you are no doubt seeing every day. The unpleasant reality is that this is not business as usual, and I'd like to share a few overview thoughts before dropping into a bit more detail. As one CEO I spoke to recently asked me, how do you communicate to people to continue on with business as usual in these very unusual circumstances? And the answer is really that you don't. It's not business as usual, but I'm going to present the case that you shouldn't confuse communication and the issue with process. As another CEO we once worked with said about the integrated business planning process, don't lose sight of the fact that process is performance and performance is protection. And if we focus on the issue being different, there is the frightening reality that if you've never experienced this kind of environment, your intuition and experience are not going to be enough to help solve the problem that this new reality is causing, no matter how long you've been in business or running a company. And regardless of the level of disruption, all decisions and plans in an organization are still linked to something else. For example, the dramatic consumer demand variability will lead to the company's capability to ramp up or down in response. What about supplier capability and preferences? So integration still matters, which means now is the time that we should be making our company's integration processes really sweat and not invent new processes. The fact is your integration processes are even more important today than ever. The integrated business planning process still applies, albeit it is likely to be quite single-minded at this point in time. However, you should still be looking out beyond the next 4 months and into the 24-month plus horizon to anticipate change. We need to work it hard by asking the what if questions and making sure there are contingency plans in place to respond quickly. The integrated tactical planning process, which supports the IBP process at an executional level, should become the central command center for picking up changes and replanning early and effectively. Remember that it's the issue that is different, not the way change is managed, albeit with a greater sense of uncertainty. That is why intuition and experience don't count for too much if you've never been through something like this before. You might have heard of a book called Thinking Fast and Slow from Daniel Kahneman, and the time now is right for slow thinking to ensure we don't regress by reacting as opposed to deliberately responding. The greatest tool we have at our disposal right now is to be able to simulate multiple future scenarios for the unknowns. Don't confuse the inner feeling that we should be replanning daily or even hourly as things change with the mindset of checking and adjusting daily or hourly, but doing a full stop and check once a week. The important thing is that no matter what the current conditions are, if you try to force one of the cogs in the graphic to go faster or slower than its connected cog, you'll shear the cogs and nothing will work. Another fact, reviewing and agreeing assumptions is more important than ever. As we've said, experience and intuition is not going to be useful if you haven't been through this before. And the uncertainty created is unsettling. And yes, it must feel like we are gazing into the crystal ball to give us the answer for next week and next month, let alone the next few years. That seems almost impossible at the moment, but it's not. So while we have our heads down and doing the doing, the fact is that reviewing and agreeing the underlying assumptions in our plans is more important than ever. Those assumptions have to tie to where we think we're going to be in 6 months or a year's time. Yes, I know it's hard to do right now, but it is critical. These assumptions need constant review, at least monthly with weekly check-ins to gain agreement and understanding of our collective thoughts. As we know them today, then as you know and learn more, you can start to replan with more certainty and invest more in doing things today that support the longer term view of your future world. Learn from history. Put time into understanding case studies such as the global financial crisis, SARS, 9/11, pilot strikes, and I'm sure you can think of plenty more extraordinary situations that have occurred in the more recent past. I was speaking to a GM in Thailand recently who said, I've been on the phone talking to my counterparts in other countries, and it's just amazing the wealth of information about what could happen here and the impact just by learning from other people in other countries. So what are the kinds of assumptions we need to explore and agree? Right now, they could be, how long are we going to be in this situation? How deep will it go? How much channel switching will occur in our business? We're seeing it now. Restaurants are shut, but supermarkets can't keep up. How is consumer behavior and preference changing versus our original assumptions? And what trade-offs do we have to make? For example, availability versus cost. The point is, you've got to be formally asking these types of questions regularly and working up the simulations of impact on the business. We need to be continually learning. This might sound like semantics, but in Oliver Wight term, the definition of reacting is action taken that has no plan or thinking behind it. Where responding is more about action taken that has been considered and deliberately planned. So what does that mean for us right now? It means ask the what if questions, create the scenarios and plan the responses to those that are most likely and most impactful outcomes. Why is this so important? It's important because you're probably feeling concerned, maybe frightened, certainly worried. And my observations over the last few months is that there isn't a lot of joy and celebration going on out there. So we need to be wary of normal human behavior. When anxiety goes up or people feel threatened, and who doesn't at the moment, we will automatically default to our reptilian mode of flight, fight, or freeze. This might get people mobilized to start with, but it will kill creativity, limit the ability to think through options, and can completely miss capitalizing on opportunities. To overcome this, we need to stick to the facts and develop objective models or simulations of what could possibly happen in the future, keeping top of mind that is the issues that are different, not necessarily the processes for managing the issue. And bring to life your company's risk management plans. Most companies do these as a matter of course, and then they just sit there and gather dust. We would encourage companies to take that considered slow thinking, in Daniel Kahneman terms, and turn them into business continuity plans. Also note that slow thinking requires far more energy than fast, which is why it's all too easy to default by making snap decisions. There's been a wealth of information published over the last few decades demonstrating that algorithms and modeling to assist prediction of the future and make decisions is a better approach than relying on just human judgment, especially in times where there is little previous experience. There are a couple of excellent references and studies to draw on, but one of the more interesting ones and comprehensive books is titled Super Forecasting by Tetlock and Gardner. You can see the reference at the bottom of the slide, who make the statement that more than 200 studies have compared expert and algorithmic prediction with statistical algorithms nearly always outperforming unaided human judgment. Does that mean we just let the algorithms run everything? Well, no, I don't think so. Models are there to augment human judgment, and the challenge in the current environment is to develop the projections and models using human judgment to ask the right questions when setting up the modeling. For example, what do we want the scenario modeling to solve for us? Product availability, delivery performance, cost, or some form of segmented customer promise? Then there's also strategic trade-offs, decisions that people can only make. As one client recently said, we've been grappling with the cost of air freighting product to maintain availability versus the short-term profit loss that could occur by doing so. But there's an element of customer loyalty in there that makes it a little tricky to estimate without modeling it. When I was in industry, we used relatively simple multivariate linear models to optimize for advertising spend and market share. I know it's not totally related to this current situation, but the point is that even with that simple modeling technique, there was no way on the planet anyone could have done the maths in the head and taken the educated guess or decision that the results, well, at least not the people in my team would have done it at the time. Finally, doing this stuff in spreadsheets is a real labor of love for some people. But wouldn't it be better to use the data in the planning systems, using the playpen or the sandpit or the scenario functionality in your planning system to quickly play with the implications in a real environment? And hence, the question about how long it takes. In this environment, you want to turn these scenarios around in minutes, not hours or days. We've spoken about process and technology, but let's get back to the people elements. I know some view this as a soft part of the science of business, but this is where, with a bit of understanding, you could release a huge amount of positive energy that people are missing in this time of doom and gloom. As we mentioned earlier, the fact is that anxiety destroys creativity. Even a small amount of anxiety, frustration, and uncertainty results in only 3 human responses: fight, flight, or freeze, as I've said previously. The evidence is overwhelming, and yet we see people every day being argumentative, contradictory, dismissive, resistant, inert, sometimes missing in action, and at times downright rude. And we kind of go, well, that wasn't good. Oh, well, I'm sure they'll snap out of it eventually. The fact is that this is an unacknowledged threat response, and not only does it stimulate our reptilian brain for fight, flight, and freeze, it turns off our prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain responsible for critical thinking, creativity, exploring options, and strategizing. Oh, and here's the kicker. The ill will that this behavior causes can last a long time, weeks and even months, which further exacerbates that slippery slide into negativity that the current situation is creating. There is, however, a role for a negative mindset, and that is it could be a mobilizer. For example, if the building was on fire, you'd be worried and anxious and single-minded about getting out of the building really very quickly. After that, however, when the problem has gone, it stops motivating you to action. We've seen companies cancelling their IBP meetings recently, creating senior executive war teams and inventing new crisis teams and crisis processes when the mechanisms are already in place. So the strong recommendation is to resist the temptation to cancel your integrated business planning or the complementary integrated tactical planning processes. If anything, tighten them up and pack down harder. Work a lot more harder with these particular processes. Deliberately keep the medium to longer term focus with the planning forums and processes. Understand that there is uncertainty, of course. Create a safe environment to be able to communicate what you do not know on equal weighting with what you do know. One of our clients cancelled their monthly management business review as part of the IBP process because they didn't know whether their customers were shutting down or not. But my response to this was to say that next month there is still going to be uncertainty, it doesn't go away, and you've just lost a whole month in collectively understanding the state of play. Anyway, our advice is stay true to the process. Remember, process is performance and performance is protection. It's the issue that is different. So let's explore some of the mechanisms you can use to generate some of that positive and creative energy, keeping on the people side of the topic. The evidence here is also compelling. Positivity drives creativity. As an example of what can happen, I asked an Asia Pacific regional director recently how's the current environment impacting you? He told me all the important stuff about protecting people and the restructure they are implementing. But when I asked, so there are any opportunities popping up and how are you managing them? And by opportunities, I meant business opportunities. He looked at me strangely and said, we've been so busy in locking down the business that we haven't even broached the topic of opportunities. But yes, come to think of it, one of our categories is dead, but there is another category showing an upward trend. He then thanked me very quickly and said that he had to go and talk to his team right now. He was in a hurry. That's the anxiety coming out. Even if it is nicely kept under control, it is simmering below the surface and could blindside you. So what are a few things you can do right now to increase positivity and explore the options? Well, literally ask your people. Start every meeting with a question. What went well today? Or this week or this month? What things you'd like to share with the team? Another very useful technique is to move the conversation from problem focused to solution focused very quickly. Also show people who currently play lead roles in your integrated business planning and integrated tactical planning processes that you trust them to use their respective processes to facilitate management of this serious and important issue. This is what processes are designed to do. So leverage them hard. Can you imagine how engaged these people are after the lead team take over their role and start to reinvent processes that are already in place? It doesn't do well for morale. So think and act positive leadership, which amongst other things is comprised of creating strong connections in their teams, elevating the energy, and continually steering the team from thinking problems to exploring solutions. And finally, we say, keep calm. But there needs to be a deliberate strategy to gauge people's emotions and organise time to routinely assess and anticipate future events. As one of my clients in Singapore said recently, while everyone is a little stressed, we're keeping calm. We're objectively assessing each new fact as it is presented to us and leveraging our IBP and ITP processes to respond appropriately. So let's summarise with a look at some of the other practical things to get tighter on with your IBP process. Make sure the fundamentals are in place. I know this is basic business management, but remember, if the foundations are weak, then so too is what you're building on them. So tight agendas and meeting discipline, focus on reviewing those critical few assumptions routinely, run simulations often, define clear decision points and decision-making guidelines, and then work on strengthening them each cycle. Remember, it is the issue that has changed and not how it is managed. A really well-structured IBP process or S&OP with supporting execution processes will see you through any situation, no matter how severe. Thank you for your time, everybody. I hope you enjoyed